She was invisible, just another waitress in a black apron, pouring wine for men who owned the city. They didn't look at her. They didn't fear her. And that was their mistake. Lorenzo Moretti, the most feared Don on the East Coast, sat at table 4, seconds away from signing a deal that would cost him his empire. The papers were signed, the handshake was imminent, and $150 million was about to vanish. But then, the girl nobody noticed dropped a glass. She didn't apologize in English. She leaned in, her eyes cold as ice, and whispered 5 words in a dialect that hadn't been spoken in the hills of Palermo for 60 years. "This is fake," she told the Mafia boss in perfect Sicilian. And just like that, the hunter became the prey. The restaurant was called Loro, a place where a bottle of wine cost more than most people's mortgage, and the lighting was dim enough to hide sins, but bright enough to count money. It was neutral ground for the city's elite, politicians, hedge fund managers, and men like Lorenzo Moretti. Sophia adjusted her apron, her knuckles white as she gripped the silver tray. She hated this shift. Thursday nights were always tense. The air in Loro felt heavy, charged with the kind of testosterone and danger that made the hair on her arms stand up. She kept her head down, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that pulled at her scalp. The manager, a sweaty, nervous man named Mr. Henderson, had been barking at the staff since 3 p.m. "Table 4 is VIP," Henderson had hissed, grabbing Sophia's arm a little too tightly earlier that evening. "Moretti, you know who that is? You drop a fork, you don't just lose your job, Sophia. You lose your future. Do you understand?" Sophia had nodded, pulling her arm away. She knew who Lorenzo Moretti was. Everyone in New York knew. He was the head of the Moretti crime family, a man whose legitimate businesses in construction and shipping were just a glossy veneer over a brutal underworld empire. He was 32, unnervingly young for a Don, and possessed a lethal charm that the tabloids ate up. He was a predator in a bespoke suit. But Sophia wasn't afraid of predators. She had grown up in a house full of them, though a world away from the velvet banquettes of Loro. She had learned early that the best defense was silence, invisibility. If they don't see you, they can't hurt you. She walked out onto the floor, the sounds of clinking crystal and hushed conversations washing over her. She moved with a practiced grace, her eyes scanning the room but never lingering. She was a ghost, a prop. At table 4, the atmosphere was different. It was a vacuum of silence in the noisy room. Lorenzo Moretti sat with his back to the wall. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes the color of burnt espresso. He wasn't eating. He was watching the man opposite him. The man across the table was older, balding, with the frantic energy of a salesman trying too hard to appear calm. This was Marcus Thorne, a high-level art dealer and broker from London. Rumor in the kitchen was that Thorne was facilitating the purchase of a rediscovered Renaissance manuscript, a deed to land in Sicily that supposedly held rights to untapped lithium deposits. The price tag was astronomical. Sophia approached the table to refill the water glasses. Neither man acknowledged her existence. "The provenance is impeccable, Mr. Moretti," Thorne was saying, his British accent clipped and precise. He tapped a finger on a thick, leather-bound folder resting between them. "The Vatican archives have verified the seal. This deed grants you absolute ownership of the Valenti estate and everything beneath it. The lithium surveys alone are worth triple your investment." Lorenzo didn't look at the folder. He looked at Thorne. $150 million, Lorenzo said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Sophia's chest as she poured the water. "Cash transfer. Tonight." A bargain, Thorn smiled, though beads of sweat were forming on his upper lip. For the future of energy? It's a steal. Sophia moved to Thorn's side. As she poured, her eyes darted to the open folder. She shouldn't have looked. She should have kept her eyes on the water. But the document was exposed. It was an old parchment, yellowed with age, covered in dense, flowing script. It looked ancient. It looked official. The seal at the bottom was a deep, blood-red wax, stamped with the crest of the kingdom of the two Sicilies. But as the water trickled into the glass, Sophia's eyes caught the text in the third paragraph. Her heart stopped. The script was Italian, but the legal phrasing the dialect. She knew it. She knew it because she had spent her childhood summers in a dusty library in Palermo, listening to her grandfather read aloud from books that smelled of earth and history. Her grandfather, a man who had fled Sicily with secrets he took to his grave, had taught her the old ways, the old tongue. She froze. The bottle hovered over the glass. The word on the parchment was ferrovia, railway. The document was dated 1862, but in the specific dialect of the Sicilian courts of that region, in 1862, they didn't use the Italianized ferrovia. They used the borrowed French term or the specific local dialect word strada ferrata in legal texts. Ferrovia was a mainland term, standardized later in that specific province's legal code. And there was something else, a phrase near the bottom, in fede di Dio e del re, in faith of God and King. Sophia's breath hitched. In 1862, in that specific rebellious province of Sicily, the local magistrates were anti-monarchist. They refused to invoke the king in land deeds. It was a famous historical quirk, something only a scholar or a local would know. This document wasn't from 1862. It was a forgery, a brilliant, expensive forgery, but a fake nonetheless. Thorn was smiling. Lorenzo had pulled a gold pen from his jacket pocket. "The wire is ready," Lorenzo said, uncapping the pen. "Just sign the receipt of authenticity, and the funds are released." Sophia's mind raced. If she spoke, she was fired. Worse, she might be killed. Men like Moretti didn't like witnesses, and they certainly didn't like waitresses interfering in 9-figure deals. But if she stayed silent, this man, this dangerous, terrible man, was about to be robbed blind by a cheap suit from London. "Don't do it, Sophia," she told herself. "Walk away. Refill table 5. Go home to your cat and your empty apartment." Lorenzo lowered the pen to the paper. Sophia's hand trembled. The water pitcher clinked against the glass, a sharp, ringing sound that cut through the tension. Lorenzo's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto hers. They were cold, dead eyes. "Careful," he murmured, dismissive. Thorn laughed nervously. "Good help is hard to find, eh, Lorenzo?" That laugh did it. The arrogance, the mockery. Sophia didn't retreat. She set the pitcher down on the table with a deliberate thud. Lorenzo paused, the pen hovering millimeters from the paper. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the fire in her hazel eyes, the set of her jaw. "Excuse me?" Lorenzo asked, his voice dropping an octave. Sophia took a breath. She looked at Thorn, then at Lorenzo. She didn't speak English. She didn't speak the standard Italian she used with the kitchen staff. She switched to Sicilian, a deep, guttural, archaic dialect that rolled off her tongue like thunder. "Cistu è falso," she said clearly. "Stu documento è carta straccia." This is fake. This document is trash paper. The silence that followed was absolute. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The entire restaurant seemed to blur into the background, leaving only the 3 of them in a sharp, terrifying focus. Thorn blinked, his smile faltering. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. I beg your pardon? Lorenzo Moretti did not blink. He slowly capped his pen. He turned his body fully toward Sophia, ignoring the confused art dealer. When he spoke, it was in the same dialect, fluent but modernized, the Sicilian of a man who heard it at home but lived in America. Chi sei tu? He asked softly. Who are you? Sophia didn't back down. She pointed a slender finger at the parchment. The date is 1862, she continued in Sicilian, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her veins. But the syntax in the third paragraph uses ferrovia. In the Corleone district courts of that era, the magistrates were Bourbon loyalists who refused standardized Italian legal terms until 1865. They would have written strada ferrata. And look at the invocation. She leaned over the table, invading the personal space of the most dangerous man in New York. They invoke the king, that magistrate, Judge DiMarco. I know his signature. My grandfather studied his rulings. Was a Garibaldino. He hated the king. He never invoked the crown in land deeds. Never. Not once. She looked Lorenzo dead in the eye. This paper was written by someone who knows history, but not the heart of the people. It's a forgery, Signore Moretti, and you are about to pay $150 million for a piece of paper that isn't worth the match to burn it. Lorenzo stared at her. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were searching hers, assessing, calculating. Thorne, realizing he was losing control, stood up halfway. What is this? Who is this woman? Lorenzo, are you going to let the help insult me? He switched to English, his voice rising in panic. She's crazy. She's probably high. Look at her. Lorenzo held up a hand, a single commanding gesture. Thorne snapped his mouth shut. Lorenzo looked at the document. He looked at the word ferrovia. Then he looked back at Sophia. You speak the dialect of the hills, Lorenzo said in English now, his voice dangerously calm. Not the city. Who are you? I'm just a waitress, Sophia said, switching back to English, picking up her tray. And I hate seeing good money go to bad liars. Lorenzo turned his gaze to Thorne. The temperature at the table dropped 20 degrees. Marcus, Lorenzo said. Lorenzo, listen, Thorne stammered, his face pale. This is absurd. She's a waitress. What does she know about 19th century Sicilian jurisprudence? I have certificates from the Vatican, from Christie's. Do you? Lorenzo asked. He picked up the document. Because she's right about one thing. My great-grandfather was from that province, and he used to tell stories about how they refused to speak the king's Italian. Lorenzo stood up. He was tall, looming over the table. He picked up the heavy crystal water glass Sophia had just filled. He looked at the water, then at Thorne. Verify it, Lorenzo said to the large man standing by the entrance, his bodyguard, Rocco. Call the historian in Rome. Wake him up. Send him a picture of this paragraph. Lorenzo, please, Thorne started. Sit down, Lorenzo barked. Thorne sat. The next 10 minutes were the longest of Sophia's life. She tried to walk away, to go back to the kitchen, but Rocco blocked her path. The boss wants you to stay, he rumbled. So she stood there, clutching her tray, while the restaurant went silent around them. Other diners sensed the danger and hurriedly asked for checks. Finally, Rocco's phone buzzed. He answered, listened for a moment, and then paled. He walked over to Lorenzo and whispered in his ear. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw jumped. He nodded slowly. He turned to Thorne. The historian says, Lorenzo began, his voice terrifyingly polite, that the use of ferrovia in a Corleone deed from 1862 is historically impossible. He also said that the ink, well, he suspects if we tested the carbon dating, it wouldn't be from the 19th century. Thorne knocked his chair over as he scrambled backward. Lorenzo, I didn't know. I was duped. The broker in Naples, he swore to me. 150 million, Lorenzo interrupted, stepping around the table. You tried to steal $150 million from me, Marcus. I can fix this, Thorne squealed, backing into a waiter. I can get your money back. I didn't know. Lorenzo sighed. He looked tired. He gestured to Rocco. Take Mr. Thorne to the kitchen. Use the service exit. We'll discuss the refund policy in the alley. Rocco and another man materialized from the shadows. They grabbed Thorne by the arms. The art dealer screamed, but the sound was cut short as a heavy hand clamped over his mouth. They dragged him away, his expensive Italian loafers dragging on the carpet. The restaurant was deathly silent. Lorenzo straightened his cuffs. He picked up the fake deed and ripped it in half, then in quarters. He dropped the confetti onto the table. Then he turned to Sophia. The adrenaline was fading, leaving Sophia shaking. She realized what she had just done. She had humiliated a business partner of the Mafia. She had witnessed a crime, or at least the prelude to one. Lorenzo stepped closer to her. He smelled of expensive cologne, tobacco, and danger. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sophia," she whispered. "Sophia," he repeated, testing the weight of the name. "You just saved me a fortune, Sophia. Why?" "I don't like thieves," she said, her chin lifting slightly. Lorenzo studied her face, his eyes lingering on her mouth, then her eyes. "Most people would have let me sign. They would have enjoyed watching the bad guy get ripped off." "I don't know you," Sophia said, "but I know the truth. And that paper was a lie." Lorenzo reached into his jacket pocket. For a terrifying second, Sophia thought he was reaching for a gun. Instead, he pulled out a black card made of heavy titanium. He placed it on her tray. "Walk away, Sophia," he said softly. "Quit this job. Tonight." "This place? It's not safe for you anymore. Thorne has partners. They won't be happy the deal fell through, and they might wonder who tipped me off." "I can take care of myself," she said, though her voice wavered. "I'm sure you can," Lorenzo said. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But you won't have to." He turned and walked out of the restaurant, his entourage trailing behind him like a dark wake. Sophia stood alone in the center of the dining room, the titanium card heavy on her tray. She looked down at it. There was no bank logo, just a phone number embossed in gold. She didn't know it then, but her life as a waitress was over. And her life as the target of the most powerful and dangerous obsession in New York had just begun. 3 days passed. Sophia didn't quit. She needed the money. Her grandmother was in a care facility in Queens, and the bills were mounting. Private rooms, memory care specialists, medication. It all cost more than Sophia made in a month. She couldn't afford to be afraid of Lorenzo Moretti's warnings, but the warning proved true. On Tuesday night, as Sophia was unlocking the door to her small apartment in Brooklyn, she felt it. That prickle on the back of her neck, the sensation of being watched. She spun around. The street was empty, just the flickering street lamp and the distant wail of a siren. She hurried inside, locking the deadbolt, the chain, and the floor bolt. She leaned against the door, breathing hard. "You're paranoid," she told herself. "Nobody cares about a waitress." She walked into her living room and stopped cold. Sitting on her coffee table was a black envelope. Her windows were locked. Her door had been locked. There was no sign of forced entry. Yet there it was. A matte black envelope with her name, Sophia, written in silver ink in elegant handwriting. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a check. The check was made out to Sunnyvale Memory Care Facility. It was for $200,000. paid in full for the next 2 years of her grandmother's care. The note was short. I told you to quit. You didn't listen. Now you owe me. Be outside at 8:08 p.m. Wear the dress. The dress, Sophia whispered aloud. She looked back into the envelope. There was a photo, a Polaroid. It was a picture of her closet, taken from inside her bedroom. It showed a red silk dress she had bought at a thrift store years ago and never worn. He had been in her apartment. Panic, cold and sharp, washed over her. This wasn't a gift. It was a message. I can get to you anywhere. Sophia grabbed her phone to call the police. She dialed 911. Her thumb hovered over the call button, and then she stopped. Call the police? On Lorenzo Moretti? The man who likely owned half the precinct? And what would she say? He paid my grandmother's medical bills and asked me to dinner? She ended the call. She looked at the check. $200,000. It was freedom for her grandmother. It was safety. But the price was what? At 7:55 p.m., Sophia stood in front of her building. She was wearing the red dress. It fit her curves like a second skin, the silk cool against her flesh. She had pinned her hair up, leaving a few tendrils loose. She wore no jewelry. She had none. At exactly 8:00 p.m., a convoy of 3 black SUVs turned the corner. They moved silently, like sharks in dark water. The middle car, a bulletproof Cadillac Escalade, stopped right in front of her. The back door opened. Lorenzo Moretti sat inside. He was wearing a tuxedo, the bow tie undone, hanging loose around his neck. He looked tired, but when he saw her, his eyes lit up with that same intense, predatory interest. You look better in red than in an apron, he said. You broke into my house, Sophia said, not moving. I had my security team ensure your apartment was secure, Lorenzo corrected, and they found it lacking. The lock on your fire escape. A child could pick it. You paid my grandmother's bills. I pay my debts, Lorenzo said. You saved me $150 million. $200,000 is a finder's fee. Get in, Sophia. Where are we going? To the opera, he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. And then to war. Sophia hesitated. She looked at the street, at her normal, safe, struggling life. Then she looked at Lorenzo, a man who lived in a world of fire and blood. She got in. As the heavy door thudded shut, sealing out the noise of Brooklyn, Lorenzo turned to her. Tonight, he said, his voice low, I need you to listen. I need you to translate. Because the man who tried to sell me that fake deed, he wasn't working alone, and the man behind him is someone I can't touch. Unless you help me. Why me? Sophia asked. Because, Lorenzo said, you're the only person in this city who isn't afraid to tell me the truth. The Lincoln Center was a fortress of glass and travertine, glowing against the rainy New York night like a lantern. The flashbulbs of the paparazzi erupted as the SUV pulled up to the curb, a blinding staccato of white light. Keep your head up, Lorenzo instructed, his voice devoid of the warmth he had shown in the car. Do not look at the cameras. Look at me. You are with me, which means you are untouchable. Sophia took a shaky breath. The red silk dress felt heavy now, less like a costume and more like a target. She took Lorenzo's offered arm. His muscles were tense, coiled like a spring beneath the tuxedo jacket. As they stepped out onto the red carpet, the noise was deafening. Shouted questions, the clicking of shutters, but Lorenzo moved through it like a shark parting a school of fish. Inside, the lobby of the Metropolitan Opera House was a sea of diamonds, velvet, and old money. Sophia felt the weight of 100 stares. She knew what they saw, the powerful Don Moretti and his flavor of the week. They didn't see the waitress. They didn't see the woman who could conjugate verbs in a dead dialect. "We are going to box 4, Lorenzo murmured, guiding her up the grand staircase. "The man we are meeting is Salvatore Rossi. They call him the Butcher of Bensonhurst, but to the public he is a legitimate importer of olive oil and textiles." "Why are we meeting him?" Sophia whispered. "Because Rossi is the one who hired Thorne," Lorenzo said, his eyes scanning the balcony. "The fake deed was his play. He wanted me to spend $150 million on paper so that my liquidity would drop. If my cash reserves are low, I cannot bid on the contract for the New Jersey Port Authority next week. Rossi wants the ports." "So it was a trap," Sophia realized. "A very expensive trap, and you broke it." Lorenzo stopped at the velvet curtain of the private box. He turned to her, his expression intense. "Rossi doesn't know you. He will assume you are just eye candy, a distraction. I need you to be invisible, Sophia. Listen to him. Not just his words, but the way he speaks. Rossi is Neapolitan, but he tries to sound Roman. When he gets angry or when he lies, he slips. I need to know who he is working with in Italy. Thorne was just the delivery boy. I need the supplier." They entered the box. Salvatore Rossi was already there, seated in the shadows. He was a massive man, his neck thick with muscle, wearing a suit that cost more than Sophia's childhood home. He didn't stand up. He was peeling an orange with a small, sharp fruit knife, the rind falling in a long, continuous spiral. "Lorenzo," Rossi grunted, popping a segment of orange into his mouth. "I didn't think you'd make it. Heard you had some trouble with an investment earlier this week." "No trouble, Sal," Lorenzo said smoothly, pulling out a chair for Sophia. "Just due diligence. We found the provenance lacking." Rossi's eyes flicked to Sophia. They were black, shark-like eyes that stripped her bare. "And who is this? I didn't know you were bringing dessert." "Sophia," Lorenzo said. "She's with me." "Nice dress," Rossi sneered. He switched to a rapid, slur-heavy Italian dialect, assuming Sophia wouldn't understand. "She looks expensive, Lorenzo. But does she have a brain or just legs?" Sophia didn't flinch. She stared blankly ahead at the stage where the orchestra was tuning up. Lorenzo replied in standard Italian, calm and polite. "She is company, Salvatore. Let's discuss the ports." The opera began, Tosca. The music swelled, filling the cavernous hall, but the real drama was in the box. For an hour, the two men traded veiled threats masked as business banter. They spoke of shipping lanes and union troubles, but Sophia knew they were talking about smuggling routes and hits. She sat perfectly still, sipping champagne she didn't want, letting her eyes glaze over. But her ears were sharp. She listened to Rossi's cadence. Lorenzo was right. He was forcing a refined accent, but underneath there was the rough, street-level slang of the Naples slums. Then, during the second act, Rossi's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and typed a quick reply. He muttered something under his breath as he hit send. It was barely a whisper. Maybe 3 words. "Il gufo vola." Sophia's fingers tightened on the stem of her glass. "The owl flies." It was a code, but it wasn't just any code. It was a phrase she had read in her grandfather's journals about the secret societies of the 1970s. The owl was the nickname for a specific type of money launderer, one who moved funds only at night through Asian markets. Rossi looked up and caught Sophia staring. He smiled, a cruel twisting of lips. "Do you like the music, darling?" "It's beautiful," Sophia said softly. "Tragic, though," Rossi said, pointing the fruit knife at the stage. "In the end, everyone dies because they loved the wrong person." At the intermission, Lorenzo stood up. "We're leaving." "So soon," Rossi mocked. "The best part is coming." "I've seen enough," Lorenzo said. He took Sophia's hand. His grip was iron tight. As they walked swiftly down the corridor, away from the box, Lorenzo leaned in. "Did you get anything?" He said, "Il gufo vola," Sophia whispered hurriedly. "The owl flies. It's not a person, Lorenzo. It's a timing signal. It means the money is moving tonight, probably through the Hong Kong exchange opening in 20 minutes. Lorenzo stopped dead in the middle of the hallway. He looked at her, stunned. "The owl, are you sure?" "Yes. My grandfather wrote about the Owl Network. They use shell companies in Macau. If Rossi is moving money now, it means he's trying to buy the ports before the auction. He's bypassing the bid," Lorenzo realized, his face darkening with rage. "He's bribing the commissioners directly. Tonight." Lorenzo grabbed his phone, dialing a number as he pulled Sophia towards the exit. "Rocco, get the car, now, and call the banking team. Freeze everything coming out of Macau with the Rossi tag. I don't care if it's illegal, just stop the transfer." They burst out of the opera house into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and black. The paparazzi were gone. Rocco was waiting with the Cadillac, the engine idling. Lorenzo opened the back door for Sophia. "Get in," he said. "We have to get to my office. If I can stop this transfer, Rossi is finished. He'll be overextended and broke." Sophia climbed in. Lorenzo followed, slamming the door. "Go," Lorenzo ordered. The car surged forward into traffic. Lorenzo was typing furiously on his phone, barking orders. "No, I said cut the line. Use the override key." Sophia watched him. He was in his element, a general commanding troops. But beneath the aggression, she saw the stress. The vein in his temple was throbbing. "Lorenzo," she said softly. He held up a finger. "Wait." He listened to the phone. Then he slowly lowered it. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "We got him," Lorenzo said. "The transfer froze. Rossi's money is stuck in escrow in Hong Kong. He just lost 50 million in liquidity." He turned to Sophia, his eyes blazing. "You did it. Again. You heard the whisper." "I just listened," she said. "You are?" Lorenzo started, reaching out to touch her face. Suddenly, the world exploded. A deafening crunch tore through the metal of the car. The world spun violently. Glass shattered, raining down like diamonds. Sophia was thrown against the door, her head cracking against the window. The Cadillac had been T-boned. They spun across the intersection, tires screaming, metal groaning, until the heavy SUV slammed into a concrete divider. Silence. Then, the hissing of steam. "Sophia!" Lorenzo's voice was far away, distorted. "Sophia, look at me!" She blinked, trying to clear the black spots from her vision. There was blood in her eyes. "I'm okay," she gasped. "Get down!" Lorenzo roared. Pop, 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 pop. Gunshots. They were tearing through the bulletproof glass, spiderwebbing the windows. "Rocco!" Lorenzo shouted toward the front seat. There was no answer. Rocco was slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. "Damn it!" Lorenzo hissed. He grabbed a handgun from a hidden compartment in the armrest. He kicked his door open. "Stay here! Stay on the floor!" "No!" Sophia grabbed his sleeve. "Lorenzo, look!" She pointed out the shattered window. 3 men in ski masks were approaching the car, rifles raised. They weren't moving like street thugs. They were moving like soldiers, tactical, precise. "They're flanking us," Sophia said, her voice trembling but clear. "If you go out that door, you're dead." Lorenzo looked at the men, then at the driver's seat. He made a split-second decision. He grabbed Sophia and hauled her over the center console into the front seat. He shoved Rocco's body aside, pushing him into the passenger well. "Can you shoot?" Lorenzo yelled as he slid into the driver's seat. "No." "Then hold on." Lorenzo slammed the car into reverse. The Escalade, battered but still alive, roared. He crushed the accelerator. The car shot backward, slamming into the sedan that had blocked them in. The gunmen scattered, diving for cover. Lorenzo spun the wheel, shifting into drive. He drove over the hood of the attacking car, the suspension groaning in protest. "Who are they?" Sofia screamed, gripping the dashboard. "Rossi's cleanup crew," Lorenzo said, his face a mask of cold fury. He knew the transfer might fail. This was Plan B. He swerved onto a side street, running a red light. The car was limping, the alignment destroyed, but it was moving. "We can't go to the office," Lorenzo said, checking the rearview mirror. "They'll be waiting. We can't go to your apartment." "Where then?" "The safe house," Lorenzo said. "It's 2 hours north, in the woods. Nobody knows about it except me and my brother." Sofia looked at him. Blood was trickling down his forehead, staining his white collar. "Lorenzo, you're bleeding." "I'm fine," he said tightly. "Check the glove box. Is there a first aid kit?" Sofia opened it. "Yes." "Good. We're going to need it." The drive was a blur of adrenaline and pain. They ditched the battered Cadillac in a parking garage in Yonkers and switched to a nondescript sedan Lorenzo kept there for emergencies. By the time they reached the safe house, the adrenaline was crashing, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. The house was a modern structure of glass and stone, hidden deep within a dense pine forest in the Catskills. It hung over the edge of a ravine, isolated and silent. Lorenzo killed the engine. The silence of the woods was jarring after the chaos of the city. "Can you walk?" he asked. Sofia nodded. Her head throbbed where she had hit the window, and her ribs ached, but she was adrenaline-fueled. They entered the house. It was cold inside. Lorenzo disarmed the security system and turned on the lights. The interior was stark, minimalist luxury. White leather couches, a fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out into the darkness. Lorenzo collapsed onto the sofa. He dropped the gun on the coffee table and leaned his head back, closing his eyes. "Get the kit," he murmured. Sofia found the bathroom, grabbed the first aid supplies, and returned. She knelt beside him. Up close, he looked worse. The cut on his forehead was deep, and his shirt was soaked with blood on the shoulder. "Take off your jacket," she said, her voice steady. She was surprised by her own calmness. It was the waitress in her, the part of her used to cleaning up messes, used to dealing with drunks and accidents. Lorenzo hissed in pain as he peeled off the tuxedo jacket. The white shirt underneath was ruined. A bullet had grazed his deltoid. It wasn't deep, but it was messy. "It needs stitches," Sofia said, examining the wound. "Do it," Lorenzo said. He watched her face. "You're not shaking." "I'm terrified," Sofia said, pouring antiseptic over the wound. "But shaking won't help you." "You're remarkable," Lorenzo whispered. Sofia looked up. Their faces were inches apart, the smell of copper blood and antiseptic mixed with his cologne. "Why me?" she asked again, threading the needle. "There are 1,000 translators in New York. Why did you drag me into this?" Lorenzo didn't answer immediately. He winced as the needle pierced his skin. "Because you noticed the word Ferrovia," he said finally. "Do you know how rare that is? To know the history of the land deeds of Corleone? My grandfather taught me." "Who was your grandfather?" Lorenzo asked. Antonio Russo." Lorenzo froze. He grabbed her wrist, stopping the needle. "Antonio Russo," Lorenzo repeated, his eyes widening. "The scholar from Palermo? The one who disappeared in 1984? "Yes," Sofia said, confused. "He was a librarian. He fled because of the Mafia wars." Lorenzo laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. He let go of her wrist and leaned back. "He wasn't a librarian, Sofia. He was the keeper." "The what?" "The keeper of the registry," Lorenzo explained. In Sicily, the families have fought over land for centuries. The deeds, the borders, they are constantly forged, stolen, altered. But there was one man, one family, tasked with keeping the true records, the originals, the golden ledger. Your grandfather was the keeper. He fled because everyone wanted the book. Sophia sat back on her heels, the needle dangling from her hand. He never told me that. He just loved books. He was protecting you, Lorenzo said. Don't you see? That fake deed Rossi tried to pass. He didn't just pick a random plot of land. He picked the Valenti estate. That estate is the key to the lithium deposits, yes. But historically, it's the land that controls the water rights for the entire province. Lorenzo looked at her with a new intensity. Rossi tried to fake it, because the original deed is missing. Everyone thinks it was lost. But Sophia's mind raced back to her childhood, to the dusty attic in Queens, to the old heavy trunk her grandfather forbade her from opening. He had a book, a big one, bound in blue leather. He used to read me bedtime stories from it. He said they were fairy tales about kings and farmers. Lorenzo sat up straight, ignoring his wound. Blue leather? With a silver clasp? Yes. Sophia, Lorenzo said, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. That isn't a book of fairy tales. That is the golden ledger. If you have that book, you don't just know the history, you own it. That book contains the undeniable proof of ownership for half of Sicily. The room spun. Sophia felt nausea rise in her throat. So Rossi, if he finds out who I am, if Rossi knows you are Antonio Russo's granddaughter, he won't kill you, Lorenzo said grimly. He will take you. He will torture you until you give him that book, and then he will use it to become the king of Italy. Sophia stood up, pacing the room. I have to burn it. I have to destroy it. No! Lorenzo stood up too, swaying slightly. That book is your shield. As long as you are the only one who knows where it is, you have leverage. But we have a bigger problem. What? How did Rossi know to target the Valenti estate now? Lorenzo asked. And how did his men know exactly which route we were taking from the opera? We took the side exit. We didn't use the main limo lane. You think someone told them? I think, Lorenzo said, walking to the window and peering out into the black woods, that there is a rat in my organization. Someone close to me. Someone who knew I was meeting Rossi tonight. Rocco? Sophia asked. Rocco is dead. He died protecting me. Lorenzo shook his head. No, it has to be someone else, someone who handles the logistics. His phone buzzed on the table. Lorenzo picked it up. He stared at the screen. It's my brother, Lorenzo said. Matteo. Answer it, Sophia said. Tell him we're safe. Lorenzo hesitated. He looked at Sophia, then at the phone. A dark shadow passed over his face. Matteo is the only other person who knows about this safe house, Lorenzo whispered. So, Lorenzo said, if I answer this, and he asks where I am, it means he doesn't know. But if the phone is being tracked... He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he threw the phone into the burning fireplace. We can't trust anyone, Lorenzo said. Not even blood. He turned to Sophia. The distance between them was gone. They were two fugitives in a glass box, surrounded by enemies. I will protect you, Sophia, Lorenzo vowed. I promise you. Rossi will not touch you. And I will help you, Sophia said, surprising herself. If I have the book, then I have the power. I'm not a waitress anymore, Lorenzo. I'm the keeper. Lorenzo looked at her with burning admiration. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. The adrenaline, the fear, the revelation, it all crashed together. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, fierce, tasting of blood and survival. Sophia kissed him back, her hands gripping his ruined shirt. For a moment, there was no Mafia, no hitmen, no history, just the heat of him. But the moment was shattered by a sound, a low, mechanical hum. Getting louder, Lorenzo broke the kiss. He looked up at the ceiling. "Drones," he whispered. He grabbed Sophia's hand. "Run! To the basement! Now!" Outside, the night sky lit up as 3 thermal imaging drones descended upon the cabin, followed by the headlights of approaching trucks. The safe house was compromised. The first drone didn't fire bullets. It dropped a concussive charge. The explosion blew out the floor-to-ceiling windows of the cabin, sending a tsunami of glass shards flying into the living room. Lorenzo tackled Sophia, shielding her body with his own as the shockwave rattled the foundation. The lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. "Move!" Lorenzo roared, dragging her to her feet. "The basement! Go!" They scrambled over the debris, coughing in the dust-filled air. Another explosion rocked the roof, the sound of tearing metal screaming above them. They reached the heavy oak door of the cellar. Lorenzo kicked it open, shoving Sophia down the wooden stairs before slamming the bolt shut behind them. The basement was a concrete bunker, smelling of damp earth and old wine. Lorenzo didn't stop. He limped toward a rack of wine barrels against the far wall. With a grunt of effort, he pushed the center barrel aside. Behind it was a narrow, dark tunnel cut into the earth. "The escape tunnel," Lorenzo panted, sweat mixing with the blood on his face. "It comes out near the creek, 1/2 mile down the ridge. Go." Sophia crawled into the damp earth. The tunnel was tight, claustrophobic, smelling of roots and decay. She could hear Lorenzo breathing heavily behind her, his injured shoulder likely screaming in agony. Above them, the muffled sounds of boots thumping on the floorboards echoed. The kill team was inside the house. They crawled for what felt like an hour, though it was likely only 10 minutes. Finally, Sophia felt cold air. She pushed aside a camouflage grate covered in leaves and tumbled out onto the frozen ground of the forest floor. They were deep in the woods. The rain had turned to sleet, stinging their skin. "We can't stop," Lorenzo whispered, pulling her up. "They have thermals. If we stay still, we light up like Christmas trees." They ran. It was a nightmare descent through the pitch-black forest. Branches whipped Sophia's face, tearing at her skin. The red dress was ripped, stained with mud. Lorenzo was moving purely on willpower, his face pale as death in the moonlight. After 20 minutes of grueling trekking, they reached a service road. A rusty pickup truck was parked near a trail marker, a hunter's vehicle. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He smashed the driver's side window with the butt of his gun. He hot-wired the ignition with practiced, shaking hands. The engine sputtered to life. "Where are we going?" Sophia asked, shivering violently as the heater slowly kicked in. "Queens," Lorenzo said, his eyes fixed on the dark road. "We need the book, Sophia. If Matteo betrayed me, if Rossi has the Commission's ear, I am already a dead man walking. My accounts are likely frozen. My soldiers are confused. The only thing that can save us is that book." "It's in a storage unit in Astoria," Sophia said. "My grandfather rented it under the name C. Collodi." "Pinocchio?" Lorenzo let out a sharp laugh. The author of Pinocchio. Clever man. The drive back to the city was tense. Lorenzo used back roads, avoiding the tolls and cameras of the bridges. He bled through the bandage Sophia had improvised, but he refused to stop. "Tell me about Matteo," Sophia said softly, watching the city skyline appear in the distance. "He's my younger brother," Lorenzo said, his voice hollow. "I raised him. Our father died when he was 10. I gave him everything, the construction contracts, the shipping lanes in Jersey. But it was never enough. He always wanted the chair. He always wanted to be the Don. "Do you think he's working with Rossi?" "I think Rossi promised him the crown," Lorenzo said. "But Rossi is a snake. He'll kill Matteo the moment I'm dead." They arrived in Astoria at 3:00 a.m. The storage facility was a grim, concrete block surrounded by barbed wire. Lorenzo parked the truck in the shadows of an alleyway. "Stay here," Lorenzo said. "I'll clear the perimeter." "No," Sophia said, opening her door. "The unit has a dual-key system. You need me." They moved silently through the rows of orange metal doors. Unit 402. Sophia's hands trembled as she punched in the code. 1860, the year of the unification of Italy. The lock clicked green. She rolled up the metal door. The unit was filled with old furniture, boxes of clothes, and dust. In the center sat the blue trunk. Sophia rushed to it. She undid the latches. There it was, the golden ledger. It was massive, bound in cracked blue leather, the silver clasp, tarnished but intact. It looked like something out of a cathedral. Lorenzo stared at it with reverence. "The Libro d'Oro," he whispered. "The myth is real." Sophia picked it up. It was heavy, smelling of centuries of parchment and ink. "We have it," she said. "Now what?" "Now," Lorenzo said, pulling out a burner phone he had taken from the safe house. "We call a meeting. We summon the commission. And we end this." He dialed a number. "This is Lorenzo Moretti," he said into the phone, his voice regaining the iron command of a Don. "I invoke La Tavola." "The table." "Yes, tonight. At the Church of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Tell Rossi to be there. Tell him I'm coming to surrender." He hung up and looked at Sophia. "Surrender?" she asked. "That's what they think," Lorenzo said. "We're walking into the lion's den, Sophia, and you are going to be the one to close the jaws." The Church of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in the Bronx was neutral ground. It was a towering Gothic structure, filled with shadows and the scent of incense. At 5 a.m. the pews were empty of the faithful, but filled with the wolves of New York. The heads of the 5 families were there, old men in expensive coats, sitting silently in the front rows. They were the jury. Salvatore Rossi stood at the altar, looking triumphant. He wore a fresh suit, a white rose in his lapel. Standing next to him, looking down at his shoes, was Matteo Moretti. Lorenzo pushed open the heavy oak doors. He walked down the center aisle, limping slightly, but his head held high. He wore a borrowed trench coat over his bloodied shirt. Sophia walked beside him. She still wore the ruined red dress, covered by a leather jacket Lorenzo had found in the truck. She clutched the heavy blue book to her chest like a shield. The silence in the church was absolute. "Lorenzo!" Rossi's voice boomed, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You look terrible. I see you brought the waitress. Is she here to take our drink orders?" A ripple of laughter went through the pews. "I am here," Lorenzo said, stopping at the foot of the altar, "to address a grievance. You attacked me. You tried to steal from me, and you corrupted my blood." He looked at Matteo. Matteo didn't look up. "Business is business, Lorenzo," Rossi shrugged. "You were weak. You let a woman interfere in our deal. The commission agrees. You are unfit to lead. Surrender your territories, and I will let you live. You can move to Florida. Retire." "And the girl?" Lorenzo asked. "The girl comes with me," Rossi smiled. "She has a sharp tongue. I want to see if I can tame it." Lorenzo looked at the old men in the pews. "Is this the will of the table? You side with a man who forges deeds? A man who lies about his history?" "History is written by the victors," an old Don in the front row croaked. "Sign the papers, Lorenzo. It's over." Lorenzo turned to Sophia. "Read it." Sophia stepped forward. She placed the golden ledger on the marble lectern, right next to the Bible. The sound of the heavy book hitting the stone echoed like a gunshot. She opened the silver clasp. The pages rustled. "Who is this?" Rossi demanded, stepping forward. "Get her away from the altar." "I am Sophia Russo," she declared, her voice strong, projecting to the back of the church. "Granddaughter of Antonio Russo, the keeper of the registry." The name sucked the air out of the room. The old Don sat up straighter. They knew the name. "That book," the old Don whispered. "This book," Sophia said, "contains the original land grants of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, dated from 1800 to 1890. It records every transfer, every sale, and every birthright." She flipped the pages, the parchment, crackling. She found the entry she needed. "Salvatore Rossi," she read. "You claim your family comes from the nobility of Naples. You claim the title of Don by blood." She looked up at him. "But here, in the census of 1874, the Rossi family of your district is listed. Your great-grandfather was not a landowner. He was an informant for the Piedmontese police, a Spiro." The word hung in the air. Spiro. Copper rat. In the Mafia there is no greater insult. To be descended from a rat is to be unclean. The room erupted in murmurs. "She lies!" Rossi screamed, his face turning purple. "She's reading a fairy tale." "It is signed," Sophia continued, "by the Bishop of Palermo. And," she turned the page, "regarding the Valenti estate you tried to sell Lorenzo. You don't own it. The deed belongs to the Orfanotrofio di Santa Lucia, the orphanage. You stole land from orphans, and the church, Salvatore." She looked at the Dons. "He is not a man of honor. He is a thief who steals from God and descends from police informants." The mood in the room shifted instantly. The Dons looked at Rossi with disgust. Lineage was everything. Religion was everything. Rossi had violated both. "Kill her!" Rossi shrieked, pulling a gun from his waistband. "Matteo! Kill her!" Matteo looked at Rossi. Then he looked at Lorenzo. He looked at the brother who had raised him, and the man who was currently pointing a gun at a woman holding a holy book. Matteo's hand moved. He drew his weapon, but he didn't aim at Sophia. Bang! The shot deafened them. Salvatore Rossi looked down at his chest. A red flower bloomed on his white shirt. He looked at Matteo in shock. "You!" Rossi gurgled. He collapsed backward onto the altar steps, dead before he hit the marble. Matteo dropped his gun. He fell to his knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Enzo. I'm sorry." Lorenzo walked up to his brother. He looked down at him. There was no hate in his eyes, only a profound sadness. "You chose a side, Matteo," Lorenzo said softly. "You can't come back from that." Lorenzo looked at the commission. "Rossi is dead. His territory is forfeit. Does anyone dispute this?" The old Don stood up. He looked at Sophia, then at the book. "The book, it stays." "The book stays with the keeper," Lorenzo said, putting a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "And the keeper stays with me." The Don nodded slowly. "So be it. Hail Don Moretti." The lady of the house. 6 months later. Laura was closed for a private event. The same restaurant where Sophia had once cleared tables was now filled with flowers. Sophia sat at table 4, the same table where her life had changed. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a white silk gown, a diamond ring on her finger that cost more than the restaurant itself. Lorenzo sat opposite her. The scar on his forehead had faded to a thin white line. He looked relaxed, younger. "The port deal closed today," Lorenzo said, pouring the wine himself. "Legally. No bribes. Just good business." "And the lithium?" Sophia asked, swirling her glass. "We donated the land to the church, as the book required," Lorenzo smiled. But the construction contracts to build the orphanage? Those went to Moretti Construction. A fair trade. Sophia smiled. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. Not the golden ledger. That was hidden in a vault in Zurich now, but a new one. I found a discrepancy in the shipping logs for the container ships, she said, sliding the notebook to him. Your captain in Jersey is skimming off the top. He's using the fuel surcharge code. Lorenzo took the notebook. He looked at her with that same intense admiration he had shown in the cabin. You learned the dialect of the business fast, he said. I had a good teacher, she replied. I need a new consigliere, Lorenzo said, his voice low. Matteo's spot is still empty. Matteo was in exile, managing a small casino in darkest Nevada, alive but banished. I'm not a consigliere, Lorenzo, Sophia said, leaning across the table. She took his hand. I'm the keeper. I tell you what is real and what is fake, and everything else is ours, she whispered. Lorenzo kissed her hand. In fede di Dio e del Re, he quoted the old deed. In faith of God and King. No, Sophia corrected him, her eyes sparkling. In faith of the Queen. And that is how a waitress with a sharp eye and a forgotten language brought down an empire and built a new one. Sophia didn't just save Lorenzo Moretti from a scam, she saved him from losing his legacy. In a world of fakes, forgeries, and lies, she was the only thing that was real. What would you do if you saw a crime happening at your job? Would you stay silent like everyone else, or would you speak up and risk it all? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We have a new drama coming next week about a homeless man who turns out to be a missing billionaire, and you won't want to miss that. Thanks for watching.